already was nominated and won for Best Foreign Film. So if Best Foreign Film is the equivalent to Best Picture for the foreign films, why is it then allowed to be nominated for Best Picture?
This is Robert Storms, and when Parasite won Best Picture in 2020, he made this video.
I just want to know. It's ridiculous. It's the Oscars and their fucking woke-ass fucking agenda, and I'm fucking tired of it. I am tired of these fucking agendas. Why can't the best movie win the Best Picture?
I've never seen such an ignorant video about the Oscars from someone who clearly had no clue what they were talking about. I was honestly tempted to end my 3-year hiatus from YouTube to respond to this video, but rightfully so, the community tore his video apart.
Why would you get angry?
Well, in this case, he was angry because it's political. This is woke Hollywood giving the award to Parasite.
His opinion, though, about the Oscars being too woke and political is a sentiment that isn't exclusive to him. Over the past 7 odd years or so, I have seen this opinion gaining more and more traction after each ceremony.
Stop using your platform as an excuse to push your own political views. Stop trying to inject it into every movie and TV show that you produce.
Is this actually true? As someone who has been watching the Oscars every year since 2008, I want to answer this question, because I don't think anyone actually has. So, let's answer the question. Are the Oscars too political? Part 1. The films are too political. So, it's 1927. World War I is long over, and oh look, this new film has just come out called Wings. Let's watch. 2 young men dreaming of being fighter pilots during the war. The film is very patriotic, filled with spectacle. Wow, look at the first same-sex kiss on the screen, and the first Hollywood film to feature nudity. Wow. Wings would then go on to become the first ever winner of Best Picture. It wears its patriotism on its sleeve. A celebration of the American fighter pilots during World War I. The Germans are portrayed very menacingly with no nuance to them. It's just about the all-American heroes who saved the day. This is in great contrast to the 3rd winner of Best Picture from 1930, All Quiet on the Western Front. Just like Wings, it is also about friends who sign up to enter the war. This time, however, it is told from the German perspective. They start off very patriotic and willing to serve their country. But when they get out there, the reality of war hits them as they die one by one. There is a great conversation that the soldiers have at one point in the film about the pointlessness of this war.
I think it's more a kind of fever. Nobody wants it in particular, and then all at once, here it is. We didn't want it. The English didn't want it. And here we are, fighting.
Also, when our main character kills a soldier for the first time, he has a breakdown and tells him that he could have been his brother or his friend. The only difference is that they were just born in different countries. The film has a very strong anti-war message, also symbolized at the end, showing off the graves of everyone who died. Both Wings and All Quiet have strong political stances in them, be it from different angles. But there is no denying that these are political-leaning films. All Quiet was even banned in Nazi Germany because they thought the Germans were portrayed as cowards. Ironically, though, the film was banned in Poland because they thought the Germans were too sympathetic. So there are 2 different ways of politically reading this film. With World War I out the way, let's talk about World War II, or primarily, the build-up to America actually entering the war. Now, I would say the most scathing political film about Nazi Germany at this time is Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator. A really scathing satire of Hitler, and one of the only ones made during his lifetime. But I really want to focus on the ending of the film, in which Charlie Chaplin seemingly breaks character and delivers a speech. A call to action, to say no to fascism and yes to freedom. We the people, he says, have the power to make that happen. The film's ending speech seems like a call to the world to rise up. And at this point in 1940, America hadn't even entered the war yet. Chaplin is essentially pleading for help. If that's not a political film, then I don't know what is. If people think today's films are too political, oh boy, what would they have said back then?
Oh, why should we listen to this British man telling us to get involved in a foreign war. The Academy have shown their bias by nominating this movie. I'll stick with non-political movies, thank you very much. Like Wings.
Just before America entered the war in late 1941, a biopic called Sergeant York had just come out, detailing the heroic actions of Alvin York during World War I. The film is credited with influencing many young men to enlist in the army, with its patriotic themes being so relevant and inspirational at the time. York is also shown to be very religious, with the first hour and a half of the film showing his religious reawakening. He has a very strong moral code, and the idea the film presents is that America fighting in the war is a divine intervention, cemented by this line in the film.
Well, I reckon the good Lord was a-protecting me, sir.
While the filmmakers didn't intend for this, the timing of the film to come out was perfect. Greatly affected by the Pearl Harbor attack, the film inspired generations to go to war. In 1942 and 1943, two films won Best Picture that are widely considered to be World War II propaganda. The first one is Mrs. Miniver. Made during and before America went to war, the film is about how this British family is affected by the war, taking place in the UK and starring both British and American actors. The film was used up to stir up American sympathy for Britain during this time. Winston Churchill even claimed the film did more for the war effort than a bunch of destroyers ever could. Depicting scenes of bombings, frightened children, and civilian casualties, the film shows the hopelessness of the situation, but the British spirit to not give up. This is really memorialized in the last scene of the film, where everyone enters a bombed-out church and the vicar makes a speech, in a way similar to Charlie Chaplin's in The Great Dictator, about how this is the people's war and we must fight for freedom and not let tyranny win. The vicar's speech was even printed in newspapers at the time, and President Roosevelt used it to boost morale. The film ends with a title card that reads, "America needs your money. Buy defense bombs and stamps every payday." The cherry on top of this propaganda cake. The second one, widely considered to be one of the greatest films ever made, is Casablanca. Aimed at the Americans who are just completely neutral about the war, represented by Humphrey Bogart's character Rick. Rick starts the film off completely neutral about the war. It doesn't affect him as long as business in his bar is great. He doesn't even help the refugees here who want passage to America. America in this film is treated like the last haven for people to flee the war.
To America. To America.
To America.
Interestingly, a large portion of the extras and other minor roles were actually played by real European refugees, just to add more authenticity to the film. Rick comes across an old lover of his, played by Ingrid Bergman, who also is seeking passage to America with her husband. This does change him, and gradually through the course of the film, he starts to take risks, helps people get to America, and sends her and her husband off too. Rick starts off as a neutral person, doesn't stick his neck out for no one, but love changes him. He's the only American character in the film, so he represents America, particularly the neutral people of America. He sacrifices his life in Casablanca for the woman he loves, whom he probably is never going to see again. It's very romantic, and that is what this film is preaching. Take this war seriously, because it will affect the people you love. Enlist now! Other propaganda films nominated during this time period include Foreign Correspondent, about an American journalist going to London just before the UK enters the war and getting involved in a conspiracy to expose enemy spies within the UK. The film ends with the American journalist giving a radio speech urging Americans to get involved while London is being bombed. 49th Parallel, about 6 Nazis who survive a submarine sinking on the coast of Canada and go on a journey to get to America. As a neutral country, if they get there, they have to send them back to Germany. They commit several murders and crimes on the way, including killing Laurence Olivier. The message in the film is clear. Stay neutral, or more criminals like this will enter the country. Wake Island. Made to commemorate the soldiers who lost their lives during the Battle of Wake Island, which happened shortly after Pearl Harbor. Though all of the American soldiers lost their lives, the film claims their sacrifice is not in vain and that America will fight on because this is not the end. Every character dies a brave, heroic death and doesn't give up. A true source of inspiration for everyone sent to war, and in which we serve. About the British Navy and how important they are to the war effort, showcasing imagery of patriotism and national unity during defeat. The film was made in collaboration with the Military of Defense, who gave them advice on what makes good propaganda, and watching it, you can certainly tell. I'll be here forever if I talk about every single World War II film nominated for Best Picture. So, let's talk about instead when the war was over and the veterans finally returned home. This brings me to Best Picture winner of 1946, The Best Years of Our Lives. Following three veterans who are from completely different walks of life and ranks in the army, the film shows how all three of them struggle to adapt to normal life, all in their own way. Fred becomes a captain in the army, and upon returning home to his wife, struggles to get a job and also deals with the effects of PTSD. It's strongly implied as well that his wife has been cheating on him while he was away and was only with him for his money. So she becomes frustrated with his lack of money and she leaves him. Al becomes a sergeant in the army. He has a wife and 2 kids who seem to be in their early 20s now. He feels great shame on missing out on his kids' lives, and the way he copes with coming back is alcohol. Drinking heavily, and in one scene goes off on a drunken rant about the bank he works for. Then there's Homer, who was placed in the Navy and lost both his hands in the war. He is played by real war veteran Harold Russell, who, yes, did actually lose both his hands in the war. Homer's struggle is his lack of independence and the shame he feels in needing help with basic tasks. He doesn't want to place that burden on his girlfriend, but he's distant and trying to deal with it in his own way. There's a scene where a man rants about how pointless and unnecessary it was for America to enter the war. Homer gets offended and angry, wanting to start a fight with the man. Very clearly, the film is telling the audience to care about the veterans coming home. They all have their own problems, and we as a society should help them get used to it again. The Academy awarded Howard Russell an honorary Oscar for giving hope to and inspiring veterans everywhere. The very act of awarding him this Oscar is a political statement in itself, and giving the film Best Picture is very timely. It speaks to how veterans were treated, and the Academy wants to highlight this issue by awarding this film. The following year, the Academy awarded what I believe to be one of the most political films to ever win Best Picture, Gentleman's Agreement. The film tackles anti-Semitism head-on, with Gregory Peck playing a journalist who pretends to be Jewish to write an article on anti-Semitism. We see many different forms of it in the film, from the typical people who treat him coldly and differently when they find out he is Jewish,
And I'm Jewish myself.
to more subtle forms of it, like his girlfriend wanting to tell her family that he is just pretending to be Jewish. There's talk of landlords not renting to Jewish families. His Jewish secretary says that she used a non-Jewish sounding name to get the job, and she even displays forms of anti-Semitism.
Well, I mean, just let them get one wrong one in here, and it'll come out of us. It's no fun being the fall guy for the kikey ones.
All these forms of anti-Semitism keep getting to him throughout the film, and by the end, he angrily confronts a hotel after being rejected because he's Jewish.
I'm Jewish, and you don't take Jews. That's it, isn't it?
I never said that.
If you don't accept Jews, say so.
The message of the film is clear as day. It's even said by Gregory Peck a number of times in the film.
Words like yid and kike and kikey and nigger and coon make me kind of sick no matter who says them. I hate anti-Semitism. I hate it when it comes from you or anybody who's Jewish just as much as I hate it when it comes from a Gentile. They're persistent little traitors to everything that this country stands for and stands on, and you have to fight them. Not just for the poor, poor Jews, as Dave says, but for everything this country stands for.
To say this film was controversial when it came out is an understatement, but producer Darryl F. Zanuck really wanted to make the film due to his experience, despite not being Jewish, anti-Semitism. Gregory Peck's agent even warned him not to be in the film, saying it would ruin his career. There was worry that the Hays Code would not pass the film due to member Joseph Bren being anti-Semitic. When the film did come out, it upset the House of Un-American Activities Committee, established in 1938 to investigate organizations believed to have fascist or communist ties, with director Ella Kazan, producer Darryl F. Zanuck, and actors John Garfield and Anne Reverse called to testify about the film, with both actors refusing and then blacklisted for not doing so. Awarding this film Best Picture does signify that the Academy agrees with the social and political message. You could say, using a word that is popular today, this film is woke. Gee, I wonder what these anti-woke people would have said back then.
The Academy have gone full woke by giving Gentlemen's Agreement Best Picture. Now, I don't go to the movies to be preached to, damn it, about anti-Semitism. What happened to movies that tell good stories with good characters without this political agenda nonsense being shoved down your throat? I'll stick with non-political movies, thank you very much. Like Casablanca. The Academy are out of touch.
Coincidentally, though, Gentlemen's Agreement wasn't the only film nominated that year about anti-Semitism. Fellow Best Picture nominee Crossfire also dealt with this issue. While the film's portrayal of it isn't as nuanced as Gentlemen's Agreement,
No Jew is gonna tell me how to drink his stinking liquor.
the film does get considerably preachy. Robert Young's speech towards the end of the film about the dangers of hate and ignorance, it will never not be relevant. All the films I have talked about so far wear their politics on their sleeves. But there are films that are political that you wouldn't expect to be political. And to understand why, you need to understand the production context. And my favorite example of this is Godzilla. But that film wasn't nominated for Best Picture, so we are going to talk about High Noon instead. The film's screenplay was by Carl Foreman, who was known to have been a member of the Communist Party and to have communist sympathies. He was called upon the aforementioned House Un-American Activities Committee to testify and name names. He refused, got blacklisted, and left for Europe to find work. High Noon was seen particularly by John Wayne as an obvious allegory for Hollywood blacklisting. Will Kane, played by Gary Cooper, is a sheriff in this small town and about to retire after he gets married. He hears, though, that the leader of this gang is coming back to town at noon and decides to stay to deal with him. He goes around trying to convince the people of the town to help him, but he is rejected and shunned. In the end, he fights them himself. His wife does help at one point, and then when everything is done, the townsfolk come out to thank him, but he just throws his badge on the floor and leaves unceremoniously. Knowing the context in which the film was made really does change how you can read this film. Just like Foreman being rejected by Hollywood, Kane is rejected by the town. So John Wayne does have a point, calling the film the most un-American thing I've ever seen in my whole life. He then made Rio Bravo as a response to High Noon. Ironically though, the film was banned in the Soviet Union because they read the film as idolizing the individual. The controversy surrounding the politics of the film is considered to be one of the reasons it didn't win Best Picture, giving it instead to The Greatest Show on Earth with its bad green screen effects, repetitive circus sequences, and long running time, but it has a very impressive train crash sequence. Let's talk about Interracial Marriage. 1957 saw the release of Sayonara, in which Marlon Brando falls in love with a Japanese dancer while stationed in Japan under American occupation. The film depicts the prejudice that American military men went through falling in love with Japanese women. This tragedy is effectively shown through Red Burton's and Mayoshi Umekai's characters, with Burton's defying every order to marry Umekai. Their marriage is shown to be a really happy one, though the depiction was criticized for just depicting Japanese women as meek, subservient, and doing anything to make the men happy. In the end, though, commanding officer wants to send Burtons away so they can't be together. This ends with both of them tragically committing suicide. Burtons and Umeko both won Oscars for their roles in this tragic romance. Only tragic though because of prejudice. It was said that the release of this film greatly helped interracial marriage become more widely accepted in America. In 1967, laws against interracial marriage were abolished. That same year saw Guess Who's Coming to Dinner come out, a film that really emphasizes that love is love no matter what, which Spencer Tracy certainly spells out beautifully with his speech at the end.
You can try to ignore those people, or you can feel sorry for them and for their prejudices and their bigotry and their blind hatreds and stupid fears. But where necessary, you'll just have to cling tight to each other and say, screw all those people.
Reminding me of Gregory Peck's in Gentleman's Agreement, where he calls out racism for what it is. The film was criticized for making Sidney Poitier's character too perfect, being a doctor, helping people in other countries, not wanting sex before marriage. Who wouldn't want him to marry your daughter? So, the only issue is race. I think the film purposefully did that just to bring more attention to the issue at this time. The film certainly helped people accept interracial marriage more. In the late 70s and into the 80s, a number of films about the Vietnam War got nominated for Best Picture. Best Picture winner of 1978, The Deer Hunter, criticizes the pointlessness and the chaotic nature of the war, symbolized in the famous Russian roulette scenes. The film ends with what could be read as an ironic singing of the American national anthem after Christopher Walken's funeral, just the complete emptiness and pointlessness of his death, representing many American casualties of the war. About 4 other Vietnam War related films criticizing the pointlessness of it all also came out during this time frame. In 1984, The Killing Fields came out, a film that brought more attention to the Cambodian genocide. At one point in the film, Sidney Schanberg, played by Sam Waterson, says this:
"But I can't stand here tonight without thinking of those innocent people Pran dedicated himself to helping me bring to the notice of the American public."
The film certainly brought more attention to what was going on. But all of these films pale in comparison to the film that I believe to be the most political film to ever get nominated for Best Picture. And that film is Oliver Stone's JFK. Oliver Stone is a very political filmmaker, having made at this point 2 films criticizing the Vietnam War.
You're really acknowledging the Vietnam veteran, and I think what you're saying is that for the first time, you really understand what happened over there. And I think what you're saying is that it should never, ever in our lifetimes happen again.
And JFK starting his trilogy on American presidents. Based on his films, he seems to have a great distrust of the American government, JFK being nothing more than a 3.5-hour-long conspiracy film about the JFK assassination. The characters aren't characters, they are just vessels to spout out Oliver Stone's conspiratory nonsense, with all these hilarious imagined scenes of government officials openly speaking about killing Kennedy, then pinning it on Lee Harvey Oswald. And in one sequence, Joe Pesci has died, so Kevin Costner imagines these shady masked government officials who are chasing him around his house to kill him. Oh yeah, this film isn't political. This film doesn't have an agenda. It's all today's films that do. If Oliver Stone wasn't a filmmaker, he would be a conspiracy theorist on YouTube. I just don't understand how people can say films today are too political and agenda-driven when a film like this was nominated for 8 Oscars, including Best Picture.
Really, all this boils down to is that people are noticing it more because it's politics they don't agree with. I mean, who's going to disagree with the message, Hitler is bad, anti-Semitism is bad, interracial relationships are good, the Vietnam War was pointless? Films, they respond to their political and social context, and they always have, and they always will.
Looking at the Best Picture nominees from the first ceremony all the way to the present, you'll see a mix of political and non-political films nominated.
I will be here forever if I go through every single film nominated for Best Picture with a political stance, because believe me, there are so many from the inception of the Oscars to the present day. I mean, I've not even gone through like the religious epics that were nominated during the 1950s or even into recent times with the Trump administration and the films that respond to that, particularly Joker, Get Out, etc., or even the Me Too movement. I mean, you've got Promising Young Women, and you've also got Tar that came out recently, which is a criticism of cancel culture. But really, I just hope that people who say today's films are too political will actually do some thinking and think, maybe I just don't agree with the message, because it's never going to change. And I hope you get that.
Part 2. The ceremony is too political.
I'm representing Marlon Brando this evening, and he has asked me to tell you in a very long speech, which I cannot share with you presently because of time.
This is Shasheen Littlefeather, and in 1973 she declined Marlon Brando's Best Actor Oscar for The Godfather.
And the reasons for this being are the treatment of American Indians today by the film industry.
Marlon Brando was protesting how Native Americans are treated in Hollywood and the siege at Wounded Knee. She was met with cheers and boos during the speech. He was greatly criticized for doing this, drawing remarks from Raquel Welch and Clint Eastwood. It was also said that John Wayne was so angry he tried to get on the stage and get her off. Michael Caine, who co-hosted the ceremony, criticized Brando letting some poor little Indian girl take the boos instead of standing up and doing it himself.
This prompted the Academy to ban people sending proxies to pick up the award on their behalf. And it is said that this incident by Brando opened the floodgates for political speeches and protest at the Oscars. Partly right.
A year before, in 1972, Jane Fonda won her first Best Actress Oscar for Clute. A huge critic of the Vietnam War, people were expecting a political speech, but all she said was this.
There's a great deal to say, and I'm not going to say it tonight. I would just like to really thank you very much.
Footage from ceremonies in the 1920s to the early 1950s is pretty hard to come by, but what we do have is transcripts. Celeste Holmes won Best Supporting Actress for Gentleman's Agreement. In her speech, she says,
which is to play a part in a picture in which one so wholeheartedly believes as Gentleman's Agreement.
She then said, I am very proud to be a member of an industry which can promote so much understanding in a world which seems to need it so much. Even though no one is really going to disagree with what she says, saying it in itself is a political statement. Back to the 70s though. In 1978, Vanessa Redgrave won Best Supporting Actress for Julia. A huge critic of Israel and in favor of the Palestine Liberation Organization, her nomination was protested by the Jewish Defense League. She addresses this in her speech.
And you have refused to be intimidated by the threats of a small bunch of Zionist hoodlums whose behavior...
Later, that same evening, Paddy Chefsky openly criticized her before presenting the Screenplay Awards.
I would like to suggest to Miss Redgrave that her winning an Academy Award is not a pivotal moment in history, does not require a proclamation, and a simple thank you would have sufficed.
It was said that Vanessa Redgrave's speech cost her various acting roles. The increase in political speeches made host Johnny Carson say this during his opening monologue in 1979.
That I am in favor of using more American Indians and other minorities in motion pictures. I am against polluting the oceans of the world. I am for every nationality having its own homeland. I'm against whacking baby seals on the head, and I'm for saving the whales.
So during this time, political speeches are mocked and not welcomed at the Oscars. Even as sort of recent as 20 years ago, when Michael Moore won for Bowling for Columbine, he criticized George Bush for invading Iraq. This was met with a mix of applause and boos.
I would say it really changed when Donald Trump became president, because even I noticed that these speeches had a lot more political weight to them.
In 2017, The Salesman won Best International Film. Film's director, Asghar Hadi, didn't go to the ceremony in protest of the Muslim travel ban. Instead, he sent engineer Anousheh Asari as a proxy to accept it on his behalf.
My absence is out of respect for the people of my country and those of other 6 nations whom have been disrespected by the inhumane law that bans entry of immigrants to the US.
Note how different this reaction is compared to when Marlon Brando did it. Also, in the same ceremony, Brie Larson silently protested Casey Affleck's Best Actor win by not applauding. This was due to sexual harassment allegations against him. She later said her actions spoke for itself. Another act of silent protest at the Oscars was in 1999, when director Ella Kazan was given an honorary Oscar. In 1952, he testified in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee, naming people in the industry said to be communist or have communist sympathies. He is said to have ruined several careers and lost friends in the industry, with Orson Welles calling him a traitor. So, when he received this honorary Oscar, you can see people in the audience just not applauding him. The Oscars and politics have gone hand in hand over its long history. It's a huge platform for artists to say their beliefs, and this has not changed. What has changed, though, is the acceptance of it. You better hope that the people in the room agree with what you're saying politically, or you will be booed. So, are the Oscars too political now?
Not really. Films are always going to be political, and as long as filmmakers, actors have a platform, they are going to push their beliefs. And the Oscars are huge, watched by millions of people, so of course they're going to do that. And that's never going to stop. But I don't care, though. I don't care about the ratings, which is a big thing people make about. I just want to see what film wins. Because I love cinema.